I was supposed to be hanging out with my friend one night after he got out of work. I was picking him up when he got out because at the time, he didn't have a car. He told me he would be getting out at 7 p.m. I got there like 15 minutes early though. I texted him when I got there to tell him that I was there. He texted me back a few minutes later and told me that he was sorry and that he was going to be getting out a little later than he expected and said that he should be done in about an hour. I was a little upset for a second, but really, it wasn't that big of a deal, and it definitely wasn't his fault anyway, so I wasn't upset at him at all. I was only slightly annoyed at the situation itself, but only for a brief moment. Instead of sitting there just doing nothing and waiting for him, I decided to go kill some time by driving around and listening to music. Not too long after driving, my stomach started growling. Really, the only thing I could think of to eat was like Taco Bell or McDonald's. I ended up settling for McDonald's, as it was closer than Taco Bell was. I got my food, and then I ate in the parking lot. When I finished eating, I still had like 30 or 40 minutes of time to kill. I didn't know how else to kill time other than by driving around. As I was driving around, listening to music, and on my phone, probably texting my friends, which is not safe. I know. I was a teenager, so yeah, I'm sure you're not too surprised. I didn't really have anywhere specific in mind that I was going. I was kind of just driving and figuring it out as I went. I ended up on some back roads, which I drove on for about 10 minutes, I would say. I was driving really slow, and there were nowhere near as many cars around as there were on the main roads. So this way I could get away with being on my phone a little bit more, because I wouldn't have to pay as much attention. Suddenly, I noticed there was a car behind me. I didn't think much of it at all. I decided to speed up a little bit though, because I was going well under the speed limit, and I didn't want to piss anyone off. The car caught up to me quickly though, and it got really close to me before it had to slow down. Otherwise, he would have hit me. What the heck is wrong with people? I thought to myself. I mean, seriously, I don't think this man could have gotten any closer to me without hitting my back bumper. I was starting to get a little bit annoyed because he was following me like this for at least 3 or 4 miles at this point. I thought about brake checking this jerk, but really that would have made me no better, and, if not worse, in this situation. Either way, what he was doing was very unnecessary, to say the least. There was like no oncoming traffic, so he could have easily just passed me at any point in time. No problem at all. My friend texted me and said that he should be getting out in like 15 or 20 minutes. I said okay and started heading that way. So I was probably like 15 minutes away from his work, and I wanted to make sure I was there on time when he got out. It wasn't until I made a few turns that I started to question if the guy behind me was following me. I had made like 4 left turns by now in a row, and he was still behind me. He started to back off just a bit though, after tailing me for like 10 minutes straight. He was certainly still behind me following. The car followed me all the way to the gas station where my friend Jacob worked. The gas station wasn't in the middle of nowhere, exactly, but it was in a rural area. There were maybe 2 to 3 houses nearby, and not a whole lot of anything else going on, if I'm being honest. When I got there and pulled into the gas station, I saw that he pulled in there with me, and I saw that there were no other cars besides mine and the guy who was following me. That made me feel like something bad was about to happen. The guy parked right next to me. and with his window down, he kept trying to get my attention. I tried my absolute best to not look at him and pretend like I didn't hear him. But that's pretty hard to do considering he literally got out of the car and legit started banging on my window and screaming at me, telling me to unlock the door. I was panicking, trying to pull my phone out of my pocket so I could call the police. But right before I was about to call the cops, Jacob walked out and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Get the hell out of here, man. Or what? What are you going to do about it?" The strange man said. He then started charging Jacob and threatening him. Jacob lifted his shirt and revealed he had a handgun. That's right, when the man backed off and went to his car and sped off. Still to this day, I don't know what that guy was trying to do and what his plan was or whatever. Maybe he was on drugs or something and mistook me for someone else. I don't know. Either way, I'm thankful Jacob was there now. He was able to scare him off. Jacob got in the car with me, and we sped off as well. What the hell was that all about? He asked me. I told him I didn't know, that I had no idea who that guy was, that he had been following me for over 15 minutes. The guy was huge, and I mean way bigger than I was, and was clearly trying to pick on people who were smaller than him by using his size to his advantage, just like a bully. You see, a lot of people hate guns, and I understand why, but I hate the crazy people that get their hands on guns more. I think it's important to be able to protect yourself, though, from those crazy people, because I never would have expected something like this to happen to me, ever. I know Jacob has a concealed pistol license, but in a workplace, I'm not sure if he was legally allowed to carry or not, and that might have been why he didn't want me to make a police report. But I'm sure glad he had protection that day. I'm just worried that I might run into that guy again. I'm also worried that he will try and do this to someone else as well. Every day, I'm more and more shocked at just how many crazy people there really are in this world. Hopefully, I never have to hear of him again, unless it's that he's locked up in jail or in prison. Story 2. This night occurred about 7 years ago, on my way home from my parents. I was 22, young, naive, and, well, dumb. I had just moved into my first apartment. I was the first of my family to move away from our sleepy old train town that I grew up in. So I went home every Sunday to visit with the family, but mostly to do laundry and eat Sunday dinner. I lived about 45 minutes up the highway, so I generally headed home by 6. On this night in particular, there was a summer thunderstorm that had been pouring down rain relentlessly all day long. My cousins dropped in just as I was packing up to leave after dinner, so I ended up sticking around for a few more hours to visit. I left my mom's around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain, and this was the first time after moving from home that I encountered something that truly scared me. I don't know why I never told anyone about this. I think it had to do with pride. Everyone always gave me trouble about living alone as a single female in a newish area. Anyway, here it goes. I left my parents around 10 p.m. in the pouring rain. I was driving down the service road that leads out of town and eventually turns into the on-ramp to the highway. As you're leaving town, the service road turns into one lane right in front of this quarry train loading station thing. I'm not really clear on what that place is. It always gave me the creeps. If you're unfortunate enough to pass through when a train is crossing the road to load, you'll be stuck there for a while. Once the road passes the tracks, it turns back into 2 lanes and goes up a steep hill. As I'm approaching the quarry, I can make out the orange lights on a red cab 18-wheeler sitting in the quarry parking lot. Mind you, it's pouring rain. Visibility is low, so I can't make out the trucker until I'm pretty close to him. As soon as I could make out it was a trucker, he pulls out into the road. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting the trailer on the back of the truck. I skid around on the road until I regained control of the car. So now I'm stuck behind this guy that just pulled out without paying attention. For the record, my headlights were on, so if he had been paying attention, he should have been able to see me. Honestly, with the heavy rain and low visibility, who knows? So, I'm behind this guy as we cross the tracks and begin to climb this steep hill. Despite it turning into 2 lanes on the hill, he's driving right up the middle of the 2 lanes. I figured he didn't realize it was 2 lanes, so I just putter along behind him, keeping my distance. As soon as he reaches the peak of the hill, and the road begins to level out, he moves over to the right lane. Finally, so I move over and begin to pass him. As soon as I get past the front of the truck, he swerves behind me quite abruptly and begins flashing his high beams at me. Usually, when someone flashes their lights behind you, in our area anyway, that means turn on your lights, but mine were already on. I checked as soon as he started flashing at me. Weirded out, I put my blinker on and safely changed lanes to get out of his way. He follows my lane change and begins laying on his horn. The honking startled me, and I began to get a lot more flustered. What the hell did this guy want? I moved out of his way. My headlights are on. So why didn't I just speed up and zip away? You may be asking. Well, I grew up in this area. It had been raining heavily all day long, and I know that the service road floods a little in heavy rain, both on the shoulders and in random spots in the middle of the lanes. It's a small Midwestern town. Our roads are crappy. I had already skidded and nearly wrecked once, so I wasn't about to floor it on this bumpy service road that floods and risk wrecking again. There is nothing between that quarry and the highway, about 4 or 5 miles of wooded area. If I wrecked, it would have been just him and me. So this went on for the next 5 miles to the highway. He began tailgating me in addition to the high beams and honking. Once the tailgating began, I was in tears. I didn't know what this guy wanted from me. I was trying to stay out of his way and get home safely. That's all I wanted. I changed lanes 2 more times, making 3 in total. He followed me from lane to lane. As we approached the highway, I floored it. He couldn't accelerate quickly enough to keep up, and I lost him. Finally, as soon as I realized I'd lost him, and I'm safe on the highway, I just lost it. I was a hysterical wreck. There's only one exit after getting on the highway to stop in the small town the highway runs through. After that, it's all wooded for a good 30 minutes. I thought about getting off at that exit just to calm down and pull it together, but I just wanted to go home. So I sped right past it. I should have stopped. Once the city was no longer visible in my rearview mirror, I was much more calm. I managed to scramble myself out of my purse and put it in my lap, just in case. The rain led up to a drizzle the further I went. I was still pretty on edge. There weren't many other cars on the highway, and the majority of them were truckers. I'm cruising along in the center lane when the truck next to me in the passing lane begins blaring the horn and moves into my lane, forcing me over to the third lane. He continued moving over, nearly forcing me off the highway. I sped up and changed lanes right in front of him, so that I'm back in the center lane, slowed down so I'm in line with the front cab. I double-clicked the home button on my phone, camera shortcut, and rolled down my window, starting to take pictures of the cabbie. I think the flash made him realize what I was doing, and he began slowing down until he was behind me again. I got a lot of pictures. I sped up and lost sight of him behind me. I was satisfied. I managed to get pics, but I was just so angry at this point. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway and waited for him. I just wanted to get behind him so I could get a pic of the license plate and report this. Sadly, he was on to me for sure. I noticed headlights behind me, a long way back, but behind me nonetheless, on the shoulder of the highway. I waited, keeping an eye on the truckers passing me by just to be sure I didn't miss him. I noticed a shadow pass through the headlights of the truck, which spooked me quite a bit. Did he get out of the cab? I didn't stick around to find out. I just took off and got home as quickly as possible. The pictures were a total failure. It was still drizzling, and the flash combined with the drizzle just resulted in washing out the pictures. I could see the red cab, but no matter what filters I used, there was no making out exactly what the cab said. Story 3. I used to be an OTR truck driver who drove with another guy. This job only lasted a year in total, but within that year, I had some strange encounters on the road, one of which was another truck driver who decided to take his shirt off at a fuel lane and proceeded to wash himself with windshield wiper fluid during one of my breaks. Despite encountering weird and off-kilter people, there was one guy who creeped me out more than anyone else. He's one of the main reasons I stopped driving in the first place. The interaction happened at night. We were driving a load down to California set to arrive the next day at night. I had arrived at a rest area in Arkansas at about 3:30 a.m., just having finished my drive time and getting set to take my 10-hour break. It was dark with light rain pouring, and the rest area, in particular, was located a bit down from the highway and completely encircled by trees. It was a perfect spooky atmosphere for the interaction I was about to have. I clocked out for the night, quickly scanned around, and hopped out of the truck, locking it. The rest area was pretty quiet, with a few sparse cars in the parking lot and a couple of semis that had decided to sleep there for the night. There were benches scattered around with some canopies over them to shield from the rain. As I was walking to the restroom to take a leak, I noticed a man in the dark, smoking a cigarette and sitting on one of the benches. Walking past him, my anxiety raised a bit, but not enough to set off alarm bells. I decided to keep heading to the restroom. After handling my business and washing my hands, I headed back to the truck. The man was still seated in his original spot, but his body language told me he was now watching me. His face was shrouded in shadow due to the overhead light, but his whole body turned as I walked past. Feeling slightly paranoid, I picked up the pace back to the truck, hopped inside, and quickly locked the door, thinking that the worst of my anxiety was over. I decided to turn the radio back on to finish one of the comedy shows I was listening to and eat the beef jerky I had bought earlier. As I raised the jerky up to my mouth, my peripheral vision sensed some movement, and I looked up at the benches for that man. He was no longer sitting there. Instead, He was perched underneath the light post about 10 feet from my truck. My anxiety flooded back, and I sensed that something was off. Something about his posture bothered me, and I could sense that this man didn't have good intentions. I shut the radio off and stared back. The guy didn't move at all, and the shadows covered most of his face, but I could tell he was staring at me. This stare down felt like it lasted for 10 minutes straight, and he didn't even lift his arm to take a drag from his cigarette, which was still lit. Feeling that the situation was too strange, I called out to my co-driver, who was sleeping in the cab. "Oh, what?" he said, still waking up. "Hey man, I finished my shift, but there's also this dude staring at me in the truck outside." I heard him move about and peek through the cab curtain. "What dude?" I looked back, and the guy was gone. I freaked out and scanned all over. When I looked in the driver's side mirror, the man was now walking slowly towards the back of the truck, cigarette in his mouth. "Looks like he's walking around the truck," I said. "Really? What side is he on?" My co-driver said, confused. At this point, the guy had circled the back of the truck and was now walking up the passenger side. "He's on the passenger side now," I said. I slid over to the passenger side, grabbed my knife off the dashboard just in case. My co-driver finally saw him walking up in the passenger side mirror. The guy stopped right by the passenger door and started peering into the lower window of the passenger door. For those who don't know, semis tend to have a window on the lower part of the passenger door, so you can see if any cars are in your blind spot on that side. Feeling considerably freaked out, I yelled out, "What the heck do you want?" which made the man leap back and step on his tiptoes to try and peer into the higher window. Now he could see me looking at him. He appeared to be in his 50s or 60s, a skinny-ish man with bright blue, bugged-out eyes, and had a deranged look on his face, a mix of confusion and malice. My co-driver said, "Can we help you?" Upon hearing that there were two of us in the truck, the man abruptly straightened up and walked off, leaving both of us as confused as ever. My co-driver threw on his clothes and sat in the driver's seat. I recalled my experience with the guy up to that point, and we just sat and watched him. We noticed that every single time a new vehicle arrived, he would walk to the nearest light post and stand there. We sat for about 30 minutes debating whether we should call the police, since this guy didn't actually do anything besides acting like a creep. When we finally decided to make the call, we watched the man check his phone, shake his hands in frustration, and then sprint back to one of the cars in the parking lot, peeling off into the night. That was the last time I ever saw him. What confuses me the most is what his intentions were. I was quite bigger than he was, so if it came down to an altercation, it's likely that he'd only have the upper hand if he had a weapon. If he had plans to steal the truck, we have logs and GPS coordinates on our truck at all times, and our systems alert our fleet manager if we're driving off when we have no time on our clocks. Plus, what the heck was this guy doing out at 3:30 a.m. in a shady rest area? My best theory is that rest areas aren't watched very often by the police, and this one happened to be out of view due to the tree coverage between the rest area and the highway. It seems like this guy picked the spot for that particular reason. As for what planned he had afterward, abduction, theft, violence, I'm not clear. Story 4. I nanny 2 amazing children for a single mother who is the owner of a pretty successful small business. which means she can't be home for her children as much as she wants to. The children had a play this one Friday night that their mother couldn't attend. So of course, I stood in for her. The play ended at 7, and we had to hurry home so that the kids could eat and be in bed by 8:30. They usually had to wake up early for their respective sports practices. It was fall, so the sun went down pretty early, and by the time the play ended, it was pretty much pitch black outside. I got them settled in the back seat, and then we headed home. The family lived pretty far from the school in a really nice neighborhood where neighbors are a good walk away, and you're pretty secluded from everyone. Most of the drive is a winding road with very few streetlights. There are no sidewalks, and the road is so narrow that you almost can't fit 2 cars. Luckily, no one really goes on this road though, as there are only really 4 or 5 residences in this particular subdivision, which is why I found it odd when a car started trailing me really close. I thought it must be just one of the older people in the area who can't see well, so I ignored it until they turned their brights on. The speed limit was 15 the whole road, so I decided to pull over so they could go around me. I wasn't about to speed up on a road like this when I could barely see. However, the moment I pulled over, they pulled over too. Panic fell over me, but my mind tried to reason that if they're going down this road, they probably live here. Maybe my brake light was out or something. I looked at my rear view as a man got out of the car and waved. I locked the doors as a precaution and rolled down my window slightly. He approached the car with a smile and asked me if a certain address was down the street. I didn't recognize the address, so I said no. I noticed, though, as he asked the question, he kept looking at the kids in the back. Obviously, this made me very uncomfortable. I told him I really had to get home and apologized. He looked disappointed. "Those are some cute kids you got back there. What's your guys' names?" That was the last straw. I told him goodbye, and I slowly started depressing the gas. Just as I started to move forward, he tried to grab the door. Then he punched the trunk and yelled after me as I drove away. The kids started to get frightened, and I tried my best to remain calm. I called the police and explained exactly what happened, but while I was explaining, I saw headlights behind me. He started honking his horn aggressively. The operator told me to stay on the phone and that they were sending officers. He was tailgating me dangerously, and I knew that if I even tapped the brake, he would crash into me. We were almost to the first home on the street, and I was praying with everything in me that the people who lived there were home. I wasn't about to lead this guy straight to where the kids lived. As we approached the house, I started honking incessantly. The guy behind us had let up and slowed down as I turned into the driveway of the home. I saw an older lady look out her window and a wave of relief came over me. The lady and her husband came out, and I explained everything. Just a few minutes later, I heard police sirens in the distance. They took my report there and escorted me and the kids back to the house. Their mother showed up about an hour later, and after I told her everything, she asked me what he looked like. I described the man as best I could, and she just stood there frozen. After a bit, she finally said, "Found me." I asked who, and she replied, "My ex-husband. Apparently, several years ago, she had gotten a restraining order due to several incidents where her ex-husband tried to take her kids. So I guess this wasn't the first time things like this had happened. Thankfully, though, I never had to see him again, as the police were able to find him fairly easily. Story 5. Let me start by saying I've always really enjoyed road trips. I'll sometimes take them just for fun, listening to music and getting lost. It's usually just over the weekend or so, and I go with my dog Zeke, usually spending the night in a cheap motel if it ends up being a multiple day thing. A few nights ago, I was taking another one. On my way back, I left later than I usually would, and I started nodding off, realizing I wouldn't make it to the next town, much less my house. The road I was on was surrounded by a dense forest, so when I found a clearing in the trees, I pulled off the highway onto the dirt. I was planning on sleeping in my car, but I honestly didn't know if it was legal or not. So I continued driving through the trees until I couldn't see the road anymore. I let Zeke out to do his business and reclined my seat all the way back. When he got back inside, I closed and locked the doors. To describe where I had parked, it was opposite a small cabin, but not directly in front of it. Again, there were plenty of trees, so I didn't feel like I was intruding on the owners in any way. Plus, from what I could see, it looked abandoned anyway, so I'm not sure anyone even owned it. After a few minutes, I started drifting off. I must have been sleeping for at least a few hours when I woke up to Zeke softly growling under his breath. I sat there listening, trying to understand what he was hearing. Just then, I began hearing footsteps coming from outside the car. It was followed by a long, high-pitched scratching sound. Zeke started going crazy, barking nonstop. I turned on my headlights and saw a very tall, middle-aged man dragging what I thought was a key around the perimeter of my car. He walked very slowly, and I didn't know if he could see me, but it felt like he didn't take his eyes off of me the entire time. He had this malicious grin on his face. Horrified, I adjusted my seat back upright and started the car, ready to gun it. But he made his way to my front bumper, and all other sides of my car were surrounded by trees. The only way out of there was through him. I yelled out and laid on the horn, with Zeke still aggressively barking. That's when I saw that he was holding a butcher's knife. He started walking to my driver's side door, giving me an opening. I took it and started driving back towards the highway. I drove home without stopping. I had gone out to check the damage, and my paintwork was completely ruined. I don't know if that guy was trying to teach me a lesson for parking on his property, or if he even owned the property. I don't plan on ever sleeping in my car again, at least not in a remote area. Story 6. When I was a senior in high school, me and a couple of buddies used to drive out to a cemetery to do some late-night ghost hunting and mess around. We lived near a small town in Vermont, so there wasn't much else to do. We'd walk around, take photos and videos, but never captured anything out of the ordinary. If you haven't been to Vermont before, most of the roads are very long and windy. We live deep in the middle of the woods where there are no street lights, and houses are like a mile or two apart from each other. The road to the cemetery itself is probably about a 20 to 25 mile two-lane road with just a few old-looking, run-down houses. The atmosphere alone is already creepy enough, even without the cemetery. Anyway, my two friends and I were on this one trip up there around 2 in the morning. It took a good 30 minutes to get there, and we were about halfway when this car came up behind us out of nowhere and started riding dangerously close to us, to the extent that I couldn't even see its headlights. We couldn't make out the car or anyone inside of it, but we slowed down, assuming it was a state trooper or something. They slowed down too, keeping almost the exact same distance. I sped up again, but still, they kept the same distance. That's when they turned off their headlights. Now remind you, there are no street lights on this road, and it's pitch black. I got up to about 20 or 25 over the speed limit, and finally, we started to gain some distance. At this point, we thought we had lost him, but about a minute later, his headlights came back on, and he was right behind us again. Then his headlights went out. About 20 seconds later, they came back on, and he's directly behind us again. He did this about 3 or 4 times. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just some idiot driver in a hurry. Finally, as we neared the exit for the cemetery, the car started to let off. We turned into the cemetery, parked, and got out to start walking around. We were walking for maybe a minute when a set of headlights pulled up right behind our car and stopped. Now, mind you, it's 2 a.m., and no one else should have been up there. The 3 of us each dug down behind a headstone and watched. 2 masked men got out of their vehicle, both with some type of blunt object in their hands. My heart sank. If we had to run now, I don't know how we would have in the dark forest with the little light we had. I could feel my heart racing inside my chest as we all looked at each other with terrifying expressions. 2 men walked up to our parked car and started looking inside the windows with flashlights, then began trying to break into the car by tampering with the driver's side doors lock. They routinely looked up and checked their surroundings. After a few minutes, they seemed to have given up and started smashing at the door's window, shattering it after 2 or 3 hits. One of the men got inside and started trying to hotwire the car. The car wasn't the newest by any means, and it definitely was possible to hotwire the thing. I sat there praying they wouldn't be able to. It must have been 20 minutes when they gave up. They took everything out of the car and put it in their car and drove off. Before getting out of our hiding spots, we called the police. When they arrived, that's when we finally revealed ourselves. We lost hundreds of dollars worth of camera gear that night. One of my buddies lost his whole camera, while the rest of us all lost things like tripods, camera lenses, and other gear. The cops took all of our statements and got photos of the car's broken window. One of the officers told us how common it actually is for people to get victimized and have their cars stolen by force on these empty highways during these hours. Story 7. There are some nights in your life that are very hard to forget. I had one of these nights approximately 20 years ago. I was a 17-year-old male, and I was planning on staying out all night with a couple of high school friends of mine. I'll call them Paul and Alex for now. All 3 of us had relatively strict parents who wouldn't want us out late, and at the time, there was a 1 a.m. curfew for people under 18 anyway. So Paul, Alex, and I decided to each pull the old trick of telling our parents that we were sleeping over at one another's houses. We talked about how much fun it would be to have no set time to come home and to be completely free for a night. I decided to be the driver. I had an old Camaro that was as souped up as I could possibly get it on a 17-year-old salary. It was in good shape, and we figured it would be fun to mess around in on that particular night. Anyway, I picked up Paul and Alex from what I could remember. It was around 10 o'clock at night, and we were off to see where the night would take us. We aimlessly drove around for a while. We stopped for some food and cruised around the local area until we started to get bored. The night seemed longer than we anticipated. Eventually, we decided it would be fun to drive to a neighboring state's tourist area, and we then drove 45 minutes or so till we got there. I don't recall too much going on at the time we arrived. It was probably 2 in the morning by then. Come around 3 o'clock, and we were again starting to get bored, but that wouldn't last long. We were driving down an unlit street. Other than the illumination from my headlights and the dim lights from houses or businesses that were set far from the street were in complete darkness. There were lines of parked cars on both sides of the congested area, and that's when I noticed one had pulled out of a parking space behind me and was now following me. The car had no lights on and was slowly getting closer to my bumper. Alex and Paul were constantly looking back at the vehicle. I remember all of us asking each other what we thought was happening. Keep in mind, we were naive 17-year-olds back then. But as I looked into my rearview mirror, I noticed there were actually 2 vehicles tailing us, one behind the other. We had no cell phones back then, but luckily I had an eager engine, and I wasn't afraid to make use of it. We all agreed it would be best to try to make it to the highway to see if we could lose them. Before we knew it, the car right behind us started putting its lights on, then off, and then on again. They tried to bump us on a few occasions, which forced us to start blowing through stop signs and lights. We were now on a large main highway, both vehicles still following us, one of them side by side with us for a moment. I remember looking over, and the driver locked eyes with me for a moment. The guy just smiled at me, his face genuinely disturbing me. Meanwhile, the other car was right behind us and pushing us to speeds of around 90 miles an hour. They were both clearly trying to hit my car, one from the back and the other from the side. I then punched the gas, going somewhere around 100 miles an hour in a speed limit zone close to half that. We were able to get a few car lengths ahead of them when we passed by 2 police cars side by side. One of them immediately pulled out with his lights on. This was the only time in my life I've ever been relieved to get pulled over. As I was coming to a stop, I looked behind us and noticed the 2 vehicles that were following us practically vanished. There was only the patrol vehicle. When the officer came to my window, I told him everything. He was in the middle of telling us we were breaking our curfew when one of the cars sped by us. I frantically told the officer that was one of the cars, and he radioed another officer who was able to pull him over further down the road. A short while later, the officer who pulled us over informed us that we were right and that the guys following us were known carjackers in the area and were both caught and currently being arrested. He then issued me a speeding ticket and told us we should have just pulled over and locked the doors and windows. But at least the way I see it, I much rather would have gotten a speeding ticket than had my car stolen. Story 8. I'm 23 and live in a semi-rural area. There's not really much to do on weekends, so every once in a while, I'll go meet up with a couple of friends in the nearby city, which is maybe a 45-minute drive. This weekend, I decided to do exactly that. I left around 6 p.m. and stayed in town until around midnight. Everything was normal until about 5 minutes into my drive back home. Now, something that needs to be mentioned is I'm not a night owl by any means, so needless to say, midnight felt pretty late to me. I'll admit I was tired. In all honesty, the only thing on my mind was getting home so I could go to bed. Anyway, I'm driving on the highway, doing my best to keep myself awake, when I see some man in the middle of the road running towards my car, waving his arms around. Mind you, I'm going around 70 miles an hour at this point, but somehow I was able to see the guy in time to slam on the brakes and come to a stop on the shoulder of the road before hitting him. I laid on the horn in frustration, completely unaware at this point how odd it was for a man to be out on the highway in the middle of the night. It wasn't until the guy looked directly at the driver's side window and started walking toward my car did I suddenly realize how bizarre and possibly dangerous the whole situation was. The guy was somewhere around 30 years old and profusely sweating. He looked incredibly panicked, and when I rolled down my window, he explained to me that he needed a ride home while simultaneously attempting to open the locked passenger side door. I asked him where he was going or where he was even coming from, and to this, he explained to me that if I let him in the car, he would tell me everything about the whole encounter was off. So for my own safety, I ultimately decided I wasn't going to give this guy a ride. I told him this, but didn't want to just strand the guy. So I asked him if there was anyone he knew that I could call to come pick him up. In response to this, the guy started crying and full-on banging on my car in frustration. At that, I sped away. Looking in my rearview mirror, I noticed the guy attempting to chase my car, but quickly fading into the distance. After maybe 5 minutes, I called 911 to report the guy. I informed the operator that somebody had been running in the middle of the highway. I also gave his description and explained how he had begged me for a ride, and when I drove away, he started chasing me. The next morning, I called the police department for a follow-up to my call, and it turns out the officer who responded to it found the guy. Apparently, he was found again running in the middle of the road. What disturbs me most is the fact that the guy was identified to be responsible for an armed robbery of a nearby gas station just 30 minutes before my encounter with him. I'm pretty confident that at the time, the guy was under the influence of something. I mean, I've never seen somebody act like that. Thinking back on the whole experience makes me wonder what this guy really had planned if I had let him in my car, especially considering he was armed. Story 9. Ever since I was much younger, every summer I would make the same 6-hour road trip to a cabin on a lake that one of my uncles owned. Somewhere during my childhood, it became a tradition for basically every one of my mom's sons in the family to go up there as a sort of mini vacation together. It was fun, and I never really disliked it. I would get to spend a lot of time with my cousins, some of whom I was really close with. Really, the only part I didn't like was the drive to get up there. Like I said, it took 6 hours, which might not seem like a lot, but when you're making the drive all by yourself with nothing to keep your mind busy, I don't care who you are, those 6 hours feel like forever. Anyway, this whole story takes place when I was making the annual drive up to my uncle's cabin. I usually try to take the trip in the day, but this year I had just gotten off of a long shift and was expected to be at the cabin the next morning. This forced me to take the drive through the night, something I wasn't exactly excited for. The highway I'd be on for most of the drive saw almost no activity during the day, let alone the night, and it went through a deep forest filled with densely packed trees. Believe it or not, I would usually go the whole drive without stopping. But this time, I didn't have a choice. I was near halfway through the drive when I realized my gas gauge was on empty. This irritated me. I'd let my brother borrow my car while I was at work, and he had told me he filled it up. So he either forgot or was straight up lying to me. I began paying attention to the exit signs, looking for a gas station. From the looks of it, I wasn't going to make it much further. I didn't really have the luxury of picking and choosing which gas station to stop at, so I was just planning on stopping at the first one I saw, no matter what. Fast forward a few minutes, and finally, I saw a sign for a gas station off the next exit. Though it wasn't an official road sign, it was literally a picket sign stuck into the ground with the words "Gas Station Next Exit" spray painted on it. It was a little sketchy, but I mean, people do the same thing with fruit stands on the highways, so I ignored the oddity of it. I pulled off the next exit, but I didn't see anything right away. I kept going far enough to where the road went from smooth pavement to dirt, still surrounded on both sides by trees. Eventually, illuminated by my headlights, I could make out a gas station building on the right side of the road. But I quickly realized the place looked 100% abandoned, like it hadn't been open for years. The gas pumps had all been taken out, most of the windows of the building were shattered, and the roof was caving in on itself. There was no way I could get any gas here. I looked at my gas gauge and realized I most likely would not have been able to make it more than a mile. I pretty much had given up at that point. I called AAA, gave them my location to the best of my ability, turned off my car, and stayed put. I wasn't expecting them to be quick. I mean, I was basically in the middle of nowhere. All I could do was sit and wait, so that's what I did. This went on for 30 minutes. My eyes were just now finally starting to truly adjust to the darkness I was in. I found myself just staring at the abandoned gas station building from inside my car. And I don't know if my eyes were playing tricks on me or what, but I swear I could see movement inside the building. I started to panic a bit, knowing that I wouldn't be able to get far should there actually be some sort of threat nearby. I kept my eyes on the building, hoping to prove myself wrong. That's when a distant voice yelled out in a whisper tone, "Hey, buddy, come over here." I had my windows open just a crack because of the heat, so I was able to hear it perfectly. My eyes instantly shot to where the voice came from. There was a figure just standing near the left side of the building. I was frozen, with my heart pounding in my ears. After a couple of seconds, the figure started walking towards my car, but again, I was frozen and I didn't feel like I could do anything. When he got close enough to my passenger side window, he whispered inside, "Hey, are you looking for some gas?" I could now just barely see the guy. He was wearing winter clothes, and the dude looked homeless. I hesitantly responded, saying, yeah. The guy went on to explain how he had a container inside that he was willing to give me free of charge. All I had to do was get out and follow him. After a few seconds, I simply responded, saying no. I didn't know what else to say. There was no way I was getting out of the safety of my locked car to walk inside an abandoned building with this guy. The dude had no reaction. If he had a smile before, it was now gone. He was just standing there stiff and had this kind of empty but somewhat frustrated expression. This had to have gone on for a full minute. I didn't really want to say anything to the guy. That's when I heard the most relieving sound I could have heard in that moment. Gravel crunching under the tires of the approaching AAA truck. The guy's head instantly turned toward the truck's direction, followed by him sprinting back towards the building and into the forest. As he did this, I saw what has to be the most unsettling sign I've ever laid witness to. When there had to have been at least 8 other figures who stood up from hiding behind a set of bushes just in front of the building, and also started running into the forest. These were people that I would no doubt have come into contact with had I agreed to this supposed free container of gas. A few seconds went by when the man in the AAA truck walked up to my window with a confused expression on his face. The guy was big, I guess at least 6'5" and 250 pounds. He asked me if I had called him about the gas. I said yes, and he then asked me who all those people were that just ran into the forest. I went on to explain the whole situation and just how creepy it was. Hearing it, he offered to call the nearest town sheriff's department, which we ended up doing, but he filled up my car, and I was off before they showed up. However, the next day, I would be informed that nobody was ever found. This night has haunted me ever since. The man I talked to was obviously trying to lure me into some sort of trap. What that was, though, I don't know. But I mean, you have to consider I was on an empty dirt road in the forest and miles away from any town, house, you name it. It was anything but good. I also just don't understand why there were so many people involved. What I do know, though, is how thankful I am for the AAA truck showing up when it did. Had that not occurred, who knows what would have happened. Story 10. This all took place a few years ago. It was sometime in July, and I decided to go on an impromptu solo road trip for a day. I'm fairly into sightseeing, and there were a couple of somewhat nearby places I still wanted to cross off my bucket list before I had to go back to college in August. The plan was to wake up early to start the road trip, then see a few different places during the day, and finally start the trip back home sometime around 9 p.m. or so. I figured this way, I could maximize my time without having to pay for a hotel or anything. The trip there was fine. It was the trip back that was a different story. I ended up leaving around 10 p.m., and Apple Maps estimated it would take about 4.5 hours to get back home. I had done about half of that when I was starting to get tired, like to the point where it was becoming dangerous to drive. I told myself the next rest stop I saw, I'd stop and take an hour nap before continuing. That way, I could still get home at a somewhat decent time. So I did just that. I saw a rest stop and pulled into the parking lot. The first thing I noticed was the lack of cars. The place was completely empty, and had it not been for some lights on, I would have thought the place was abandoned. But I guess this made sense. I mean, it was really late. Anyway, I leaned back my seat and set an alarm to go off in an hour. Fast forward to when it did go off, and I realized I'd have to go inside, as I now had to use the bathroom. I started walking to the building, and when I got inside, I found the bathrooms and opened one of the stalls. I was in there for not even 30 seconds when I could suddenly hear someone talking outside the bathrooms and in the hallway. This shocked me, as I didn't even hear the main door open, and my car was the only one in the parking lot just a minute ago. I didn't see how anyone could have been in here. That's when the bathroom door opened. I was a bit on edge, but I realized it was most likely just another regular person that I somehow didn't notice. I was ready to leave when I heard slight knocks on the stall door. I awkwardly responded with, someone's in here." No response. It was complete silence. I was a bit more on edge now, so I decided to stay in the stall until he left. That's when I noticed an eye looking through the crack in the stall's door. As we made eye contact, the guy started screaming and relentlessly beating his head against the door. Thinking quickly, I used my whole body to bash into the door, bursting it open and knocking the guy off his feet. I proceeded to run as fast as I could out of the bathroom and outside toward my car. I was about halfway when I heard the main door burst open behind me. This guy was chasing me. Finally, I got to my car and started backing up, but the guy caught up to me and managed to slam his body into my car as I sped off. I looked into my rearview mirror, and as I got further away, I saw the guy get up like it was nothing and just stand there, looking in my direction. I was beyond shaken up. I couldn't process what had just happened. I honestly didn't know what to think. You always hear about crazy stories like this, but never once think it'll actually happen to you. I probably went a good 30 over the speed limit the rest of the way home. Needless to say, I wouldn't be falling asleep driving. I was now completely filled with adrenaline. I still have no idea who that guy was, where he even came from, or what his problem was. Though if I had to guess, I would say he was probably some homeless guy who just wasn't right in the head. But then again, one homeless person would be all the way out in practically the middle of nowhere next to the highway. It didn't make sense. All I know is I've never stopped at a rest stop since, and I plan to keep it that way. Story 11. I was driving back home from my grandma's house on Thanksgiving last year. It's about a 45-minute drive, which isn't too bad if you ask me. It is totally worth seeing my family and being able to pig out on whatever my grandma makes for dinner. I had a great time there, and everything went well. The food was amazing, just like it always was, and I love being able to see my family. So it was just your average Thanksgiving, or actually maybe not so much, because something horrible happened to me on my way home from leaving my grandma's, on my way to my grandma's house. Just about as soon as I got into the car and started heading that way, I realized I was really low on fuel and that I should probably stop and get some gas. I was feeling lazy, so I decided I was just going to wait and get some gas at a gas station near my grandma's house. I don't know why, but it must have completely slipped my mind because I had forgotten that I was supposed to get gas when I got close to my grandma's. It wasn't until I arrived at my grandparents' house that I realized I had totally forgotten to get gas. It's okay, I thought to myself. I'll just get gas first thing when I leave on my way home. I was sure I had at least 30 miles before I ran completely out of fuel, and there is a gas station maybe only 10 miles away. I had an old 2000 and one beat-up Silverado that had been put through hell by its last two previous owners, with over 275,000 miles on it. And I guess the fuel gauge wasn't as accurate as I thought it would be because on my way home, my truck completely stalled. I tried to call my grandma, but I wasn't getting any service. She lived kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I was even more in the middle of nowhere now. It felt like being parked off on the side of the road, with no means of transportation other than my own 2 feet, and with no way of calling anyone. I was quite desperate. Luckily, I had a gas can in the back of my pickup. Of course, it didn't have gas, but it was good that I had it because with that, at least I could walk up to the nearest gas station, fill it up with gas, and then walk back to the truck, fill the truck up, and then I would be on my way. It was pretty late though, and it was dark, and there weren't many houses around, so it was really creepy. I must have had a 3-mile walk, I estimated, maybe after 15 minutes of walking. The truck rolls up behind me. All Faithful broke down on you. Hey bud, why don't you hop in? I'll take you to the gas station, he said. No thank you, sir, I replied. I politely declined, but the man seemed to take offense to it. Are you kidding me? You're just gonna walk. I'm offering you a ride. What do you think I'm going to do? Try and hurt you or something? He asked. No, you see, I tried to explain. But he cut me off and said, just get in the truck, unless you really want to walk another 45 minutes to the gas station, and at least an hour back. I could have you back here to your truck in less than 10 minutes, he said. Somehow he convinced me to get in the truck. Man, I really wish I never would have, though, because I almost died that night. My grandparents lived in a nice area, but they had been hearing things in the news about people going missing lately, so I was really skeptical about it. This man wouldn't take no for an answer, and I was feeling really lazy. He did a really good job at convincing me to get in because I went against my gut feeling, which I never do. When I got in the truck, he was reassuring me that he wasn't just some weirdo, and that he really just felt like doing a good deed because he had nothing better to do anyways. That made me feel a bit better for a brief moment, but it didn't take long before I realized something was terribly wrong. I couldn't even make out what he was saying anymore. He started mumbling to himself over and over. I asked if he was okay, but he didn't answer me. Only a minute or so after that, he drove right past the gas station where we were supposed to be stopping at. Hey, man, you passed a gas station, I said. That's when he looked at me directly in my eyes and said, you don't make the rules here. I do. Now shut your mouth if you want everything to be okay. I'm going to tell you right now that you're going to do everything I say, or things are going to end very badly for you. I started freaking the hell out and screaming at him to pull over and let me out. He was screaming at me, telling me to shut up over and over again. I tried to open the door, and my plan was that I was going to jump out when he started slowing down, like towards a turn or a stop sign. But I couldn't get the door opened, and I couldn't see to find the door handle because it was so dark. I realized that the door had been rigged and tampered with in such a way that you can only open it from the outside. Story 12. Scary things can happen on the road at night. Nighttime is when the creeps and weirdos come out, so you have to be extra careful. This was in 2020, right around when COVID-19 started. I would often work overnight shifts at a hospital, and my hours would be all over the place. I would always take the same road home, a parkway that took me 10 miles north to my town. It's never a busy parkway, even during the daytime, so at night, I'm almost always completely alone on the road, and COVID just made it even more of a ghost town. I never even see any state police at night either. Usually, this is convenient for me as I get home quicker without any slow drivers around me. It was one night I was driving home in the middle of the night, or rather early hours of the morning. I saw a red flashing SOS light perched up on the side of the road, illuminating the taillights of the car parked on the side of the road. Clearly, someone was in need of assistance, and I was in a good mood that night, so I pulled over in front of the car. As I passed the car, I saw a man waving his arms in the air. I put my hazards on and stepped out of my car to approach the man. Based on his skin tone and slight accent, he was a Hispanic man. Due to the COVID mask he was wearing, though, I couldn't gauge how old he was, but if I had to guess, I'd say late 20s or early 30s. I asked him what the problem was, and he said his battery died after he stayed pulled over for too long. I asked him if he had jumper cables because I did not, and he said no. I didn't really know how else I could be of assistance other than offering him a ride. But then he asked if he could borrow my cell phone. He said his phone died too. I wasn't eager to hand this stranger on the side of the road my phone, but I did. I unlocked it for him and opened the phone app. He proceeded to call someone, then slowly walked away as he started to talk into the phone. His car door was open, though, so I kind of decided to just take it upon myself to sit in the front seat and try turning the car on myself. Sure enough, the keys were in the ignition still. I turned the key one click to the right, and to my surprise, the battery turned on. I tried turning the hazards on, and they worked. I turned the radio on, and it worked. So I then turned the key once more to the right to start the car, and it started on the first try. I didn't have enough time to think about how I might have just walked into a trap, because as soon as the car turned on, I felt two arms wrap around my throat, trying to choke me. I heard a voice yelling from outside, "Hey, hey," over and over. It was the guy with my phone. I broke out of the person in the back seat's grip pretty easily. I looked at him, and it was a young teenage kid in the back seat. The man with my phone was running back towards his car, screaming at me. I picked flight over fight and ran back to my car and got out of there as soon as the car was on. And I swear to God I heard a loud pop from outside that I found out moments later was a gunshot. My rear windshield had a hole in it along with multiple cracks surrounding the hole. I couldn't call the police until I got home since that guy still had my phone. I got home and told my parents, then went ahead and called 911 using the house phone. I explained to the police that I was led into a trap, that someone was hiding in the back seat, and that the man who shot at my car still had my phone, which was still unlocked with all my personal information on it. The police recommended I call AT&T immediately and asked them to track the last call that was made within the hour, but AT&T customer service didn't open until 7 a.m., so I had to wait with the cops still there. I used Find My iPhone on my dad's phone to lock my phone, which I hoped was done before they could have found our home address on there. Come 7 a.m., I called AT&T to ask if they could track the last call made, but there were no calls logged since my phone call with my mom earlier the previous day at work. That meant the man never actually made a phone call to anyone. I found out some more horrible news. All the Bitcoin I was holding in my Coinbase account was gone. Many thousands of dollars worth of it sent to some random Bitcoin wallet address, completely untrackable. The phone's location stopped updating once the thief either disposed of it or turned it off. I never got it back. A week after this incident, I woke up to my mom's concerned voice. My dad knocked on my door and told me to come downstairs and outside. I was scared, but I followed him. He said he and my mom heard someone in our backyard, but when we checked, we didn't see anyone there. My mom wanted to call the cops, but my dad said we'd hold off until we heard another noise, which we never did. I don't know if what they heard was a person, but if it was, I really hope it wasn't that man who had my phone. My address was saved everywhere on that phone. Regardless, it's been 2 years now, so it's obviously over. Still, I will never stop to help somebody on a highway at night ever again.